most common and identifiable way to manifest struggle is to have it between our hero and another person, or our hero and a thing. This is the classic hero versus villain. It is the villain who provides the obstacles, standing in the way of our character's change and our character's success. In certain stories, the villain is actually within the character itself. It's a mistaken belief that may lead them astray or into repeated unhealthy habits. Really, the villain can be anything as long as it's the main obstacle in the way of our hero achieving what they need most. And traditionally, this gets embodied by the personification of a villain. It becomes a person. You often see great villains in stories being personified in one single person. Darth Vader, the Joker in The Dark Knight. These are villains that are physical representations that get under our skin, that provide a challenge that we wonder if our hero can overcome, and we cheer and celebrate when our hero actually does overcome them. Great villains are ones that become iconic, are ones that sometimes there are people that actively root for the villain. The way that we can personify a villain and do this successfully in business storytelling is that the villain should firstly be the root source of the frustration, of the emotions and the need for the characters to change. The villain should be relatable. It should be something that the audience identifies with. The audience can imagine existing in the world that they occupy. In business storytelling, often one villain is enough. You often see movies that have multiple different villains, like even in Star Wars, you have various different villains. And in certain movies, they try to add in like multiple villains into one movie. And sometimes what you see is that when movies try to add in multiple villains, the story itself becomes a little bit muddled. Not enough time is spent on each one. It becomes difficult to follow along. So you don't want that happening in your business story. So one villain is enough. The last thing is that your villain should be real. What I mean is that your villain doesn't necessarily need to be real as in an actual physical object in the real world. But the villain needs to come from a source of truth. It needs to be something that not only people relate to, but people can actively see happening. It needs to be something that is somewhat tangible in people's minds. Oftentimes you see businesses trying to create a fake villain saying, oh, this is an issue that you should care about. You know that they're going down the wrong path when the audience goes, is it something that I should care about? I'm not sure. But if you identify something that's real, something that comes from a source of truth, something that's authentic, that people can relate to, when you say what the villain is, people will respond by going, yes, of course, that's what I'm trying to overcome. So you may be thinking like, okay, well, Darth Vader is all well and good, and you know, the Joker's all well and good, but how do you do that in business storytelling? Like, how do you manifest a villain in storytelling for business? Well, I want to give you one of my favorite examples. And it is the Mucinex Mr. Mucus character. I am fascinated by this character. This may seem a little bit strange, but this character really embodies a lot of what I'm talking about when it comes to personifying a villain. When we think of brands, we sometimes think of brand mascots. We think of the personalization of a brand's identity, becoming a spokesperson for the brand. Mr. Mucus doesn't fill these roles. The brand identity is not pro-mucus. Mr. Mucus is the brand villain. He actively encourages you not to take Mucinex. He is the antagonist, the villain in every single story that you see in our commercials. It is somebody that wants to go out and do something, and Mr. Mucus is stopping them, encouraging them to stay in bed and to feel awful. We are trying to overcome Mr. Mucus. He makes us the hero of our stories. He is the antagonist in our stories. He is the thing that is causing our frustration. We are sick because of him. We need to overcome our sickness with the help of Mucinex. Think about it. Fleming coughs aren't exactly the most cinematic thing that you can do on screen, but by personifying it as Mr. Mucus, this is the personification of the struggle against the suffering that comes from being sick. In fact, when McCann, the agency that works with Mucinex, were working on repositioning the brand, they purposely transformed Mr. Mucus. It was representing mucus in your chest, standing in the way of your better life. He was a representation of the struggle and the misery that you feel when you're sick. So they were able to personify their villain in their stories. If you look at their commercials, you can imagine yourself in that commercial also overcoming this villain. How do you do that? You take Mucinex. It's very simple, but it's effective. And the crazy thing is that while this may seem like a silly example, Mr. Mucus has actually become a little bit of a popular character, an icon in himself, just like the Joker, just like Darth Vader. On TikTok, his Beat the Zombie Funk hashtag has over 5.7 billion views. 5.7 billion views. Mucinex have not only created a personification of the struggles, the challenges that you need to overcome, but they've been able to create something that people can relate to, that there's a source of truth for, and that people now identify with and want to engage with, want to overcome. This is a fantastically simple representation of the hate and the suffering that we feel.